Welcome to the 2010 Summit Podcast, presented to you by the Oregon Ministry Network. The Summit took place April 19th through 21st at Albany First Assembly. The following workshop, entitled Leading from the Second Chair, was led by McCloud.
I just want to tell you that I'm glad that you came and excited that you came. And I know most of you, but some of you I don't know. And so if it would allow us to, maybe we could just say our name, where we're from, and that would be wonderful. Maybe the position where you are. Could we start here?
We're Jim and Shirley Phelps, Associate Pastors at Rainier Assembly.
Wonderful. Hi, guys.
Pamela Weston, Children's Pastor at Pendleton, Oregon.
Josh Gearing, Youth Associate at Jacksonville Calvary Church.
Okay.
Isaac Lynch, I'm the Kids Pastor at Life Center in LeGrand.
Wonderful.
Lonnie Neville, Council Pastor right here.
Okay.
Ben Zistel, Associate Pastor at Madras.
Okay.
Wedmore, Worship and Arts at Rainier.
Okay.
Ryan Greer, Youth Pastor of Swords.
Fantastic.
Ron Marsh, Associate Pastor Parkway.
And Grants Pass. Okay.
Grants Pass.
Sherry Rodriguez, Associate Pastor in Florence.
Okay. Wonderful.
Davis Morganson, Youth Pastor at State Christian Center and School.
At the school. Okay.
Rocky Greer, Associate Pastor, Lighthouse Worship Center in Ontario.
Fantastic.
Rick England, Associate Pastor, Hermiston.
Wonderful.
Ben Poyat, Youth Pastor, North Bend.
North Bend. All right. Well, it's wonderful to have all of you guys. And, I so often would start a session by saying something like this, and I honestly mean this with my whole heart, and I know you guys mean it, but just as a reminder, okay, that there's only one expert in the room, and it's not me. It's God and the Holy Spirit. And all of you are in very unique positions right now in terms of call to ministry. And I thought it would be good if I could just share with you a few of the things that I have learned, where I am now. I was a lead pastor for 15 years in Madras in Central Oregon. In fact, Randy was part of our church there. Josh, years ago, I hired Josh when he was about 21 years old, and he was a youth pastor there for me, and so I'm surprised you guys are here. You already know everything I know, but I'm glad you came anyway. And then I went from that role and I came into this office, and a question that is often asked to me is this: how can you go from being a lead pastor to being an associate? And for me, it's an easy answer, and honestly, it's an easy answer because, and there's some guys that could vouch for this over the years, but my approach in life is that God never called me. In fact, in the notes that I gave you there, this is something that I heard years ago from Superintendent Gallagher when he was here, and it's been a life-changing fact for me, and I think it might help you, that God did not call me to be a lifetime pastor, but a lifetime servant. Therefore, He gets to call the shots. And for me, over the years, I've been involved in construction. I've been, an associate pastor for about 5 years. I was a youth pastor for a while in a volunteer church plant. I was a terrible youth pastor. I never should have been one. But I did the best that I could at that. And then I went to a senior role, and then I came back, and now I'm back in an associate or an assistant role. And what I have learned over the years, and my dad was a great inspiration with this, Dad taught me that, listen, God gets to give the assignments. So if you're a construction worker, or you're a janitor, or you're a congressman or woman, or you're a senior pastor, or you're an associate pastor, God gets to call the shots in terms of job assignment. And honestly, there's probably not been anything that has helped me more than that statement. Just the realization that I'm called to be a lifetime servant. I wasn't called to be a lifetime pastor. Because there's times in my life I haven't been that. Now, I don't want to over-explain that, but I just want you to know that has been something that over the years has set the stage for me. So, when God shifted my responsibilities or my roles 2 years ago, I never felt like I was less than or more than I ever was in the past. I never felt like I never felt like the props were pulled out from under me, so to speak. I never felt that at all. I just simply felt like it was a new assignment. And I wanted to mention that because, we as humans tend to classify people kind of in, on scales like this. He's higher than her, or she's higher than him. God doesn't do that. I think the ground is level at the cross, and it always remains level. Now, the responsibility changes. And that has to do with job descriptions and roles, and it has to do with our topic of our conversation here today. But that's kind of where I am. And I want to read to you from a book that I stole the title of this workshop from, and many of you may have read this, Leading from the Second Chair, and it's in your notes there, as well as I believe I put it in there, as well as the authors. And I would strongly suggest this. This is written for Christian leaders. And it's been a book that has been very helpful to me, and they say it so well here in a couple parts that I've highlighted. And so I want to just read a portion of this as we start today's topic together, because I think it sets the stage in a very good way, all right? Here's what it says. The second chair, living in the paradoxes. That's the name of this chapter. And it says the second chair is a complete and challenging role to fill, but you probably already know that. You understand the tension of leadership and the high-stakes game that goes along with it. You know that serving in the second chair involves seasons of frustration and stress as you try to follow your senior leader. Because of your position and natural temperament, you cannot be passive about the future of your church or the organization. At the same time, your position seems to limit your ability to change things for the better. So we've all felt this. It's people in second chair positions, all right? It goes on and says, in the second chair, the amount of change that you can initiate is limited because you are not the vision caster or the leader. You have speculated, perhaps, in moments of frustration or dreaming that things would be different if you had the reins just for a season. You are sure that your communication style would be more effective, your handling of staff issues would shine, and bold new initiatives would be launched. You know that you would make the tough calls that need to be made, and at the same time you would win the world with your charisma. At some level, you are chomping at the bit to move into a role of the first chair. It's only natural that you feel that way. It's not a bad reflection on you or the leader that you follow. As one who is called to lead, it's simply the reality of how God has wired you. On the other hand, you may have never imagined yourself in the first chair. You neither have the desire to make the tough calls nor the charisma to charm the masses. But you envision your organization becoming more effective, much different than it is currently, and accomplishing far more as a result. You know that you hold a key position, and you want to be part of a great, enduring enterprise that is fulfilling its God-given calling and potential. God desires to use this experience in the second chair as a transforming season in your life. This role challenges your ego, buffers your speech, and keeps you anchored in your calling. It places a growth and development. It is a place of growth and development, a place of real contribution, a place that tests your commitment. God wants your best wherever you are. No matter the circumstances, no matter the comfort level of your chair, to put it bluntly, the chair in which you sit is not a lazy boy. It's often the most uncomfortable chair in the room, but it can also be deeply fulfilling. And so that's just a start, kind of gives you a flavor for the book. I would highly recommend that you add this book to your library, because it's a great book for everyone that's in the second chair. It's interesting that in this book, the way that they define a person, a second chair leader, is this. They are a person, this is in your notes, in a subordinate role whose influence with others, and I want you to hear this part, adds value throughout the organization. And a question that you could ask yourself at the beginning of this, and perhaps even when we leave, is what I'm doing in this second chair position. You might say, well, I'm actually third or fourth or fifth chair. I don't know that that's true. I think that there's the first chair position, and then I think there's the second chair. I don't see myself any different than a Brian or a Pam or a Boyd or anyone else. We are just in a chair other than the first row or the first chair. Okay? So all of us after that, we're all kind of in the same place. But is what I'm doing, does it add value to the overall organization? Why am I here? Why did God call me? Why do I have to embrace this call? And can I add value to other people? So that by definition would be what we're talking about when we talk about a second chair. The other thing I want to say is this, and I'm asking all of you to help me in this because it's important that we do this. In fact, we need to make this commitment together. You hate to use a Las Vegas commercial slogan, but it works so well. What happens here stays here. Actually, it's what happens in Vegas stays there. But what we talk about here, it might be helpful if we can be very candid and honest. And I would encourage you to be candid and be honest in your questions. And I hope that, since there's only one expert in the room and it's none of us individually, I hope that collectively maybe we can offer some insight and help each other, because I think we may have questions that are very similar. And we can draw from experiences, because we, while God doesn't, scale things this way, He does scale things this way. And there's some of us that are kind of down the road a little bit further. And I would like to just try to tap into the resources here. So. Anyhow, I hope you can speak freely is what I was saying there. The Christian second chair leaders are men and women who, out of obedience to God and their call, assume any role other than that of the first position. If, people come up to you and they say, it seemed like you were speaking right to me. I always, first of all, think that's a compliment, because I think it's a compliment that I have connected with my audience well, but also that I've connected with the Holy Spirit, because the Holy Spirit knows what needs to be said. But I've learned over the years, if I can just preach to you guys, if I can just preach to you guys about things, or speak to you guys about things that hit me, I'm going to hit the majority of the people in here. So when I put together this next little part that's a whole bunch of fill-in things, I'm going to go through them pretty quickly, and hopefully it will open up some conversation, some questions, some dialogue, and it'll just be, kind of a springboard for us to jump into that. So here's some facts about second chair leaders. They are called by God to a supportive role of the first chair leader. Okay? They're there to support them. Maybe the greatest biblical example that we can at least turn to a page and immediately see what they did would be the story of Moses. And here's Moses doing all the things that Moses did. Okay? And his father-in-law shows up and tells him what? You're going to kill yourself if you continue to try to do all this stuff. So what was the solution? Pick out some people full of the Holy Spirit that can come alongside you and help you. And one of the most obvious things that happened with that group that I can remember is when they're in the battle, Moses has his hands up and they're winning the battle. When his hands begin to fall, you know what happened, right? And here they came and they literally lifted up the hands. Thus, the statement that we often say about supportive role leaders, our job is to lift the hands of that senior leader, of that first chair leader. So that's important. Often, that second chair leader has potential to be great leaders in and of themselves. They're wonderful leaders in and of themselves. They have great potential for that, and at some point down the road, they will be in a first chair position, okay? The other thing is, second chair leaders understand their value on the team. They understand their value on the team. Now, I love to play basketball, and I've played basketball with a few of you in this room. And one of the things about basketball is it's a 5-person sport. And no one person is good enough to defeat an entire 5-person team. And the value of a basketball player is understanding not only what they do with the basketball when they have it, but what they don't do with the basketball when somebody else on the team has. In other words, how do I contribute to the whole team? And a second chair leader has to understand this role. You have to be holistic in your view of the overall team. You have to have a good heart with them. And I would just simply remind you of what Jeremy said so well in the last revolving door session when he said this: we have to remember that the lead pastor's vision trumps ours. In the fall, we have invited John Bevere to come and join us. And one of the things that I remember John Bevere telling when he was preaching his series on under authority, he tells the story of preparing in a youth pastor role, a second chair role that was a youth pastor. He prepared this campaign that literally they were going to launch, and they spent, I think it was 6 or 8 or 9 months getting this ready. And the week before they were to launch it, the senior pastor said, "I've spoken with God, and God says we're not going to do it," and he trumped the entire thing. And John Bevere told how ticked off he was and angry. And if you know John Bevere's style, he's Italian and he gets a little loud and boastful. And he says, "It made me so mad. But I learned that he had the right to do that." Now, what he didn't understand was down the road, somewhat like Jeremy said earlier, that God indeed had spoke to the lead pastor, and he was so glad later that didn't happen. When you're in the heat of the moment and you've done all the work and you get trumped or you get overlooked or someone else gets the credit, man, it's hard. So you have to be able to see the entire team. You have to be able to see the entire team and understand your value. Number 4, I said that usually second chair leaders usually reap what they sow somewhere down the line. I don't want to spend a lot of time on this, but I would just simply say this. God will probably put you in another position where you will at least have some second chair leaders to you. Maybe in the groups that you lead as you continue to build teams and you bring them up, right? So that will happen. That will happen. The kind of leader you are in the beginning will have a lot to do with the kind of leader you attract later. Kind of what goes around comes around. And I don't mean that as threatening as it might sound, but I do mean it as a potential warning, and at least to think about this. You know, the great servant leaders become the great leaders. And the great leaders have been servant leaders. And if a person can't be a servant leader well in a second chair position, you're probably not going to do that great when you get in a first chair position. So I think enough said about that. Number 5 under that section is we second chair leaders are the majority. And I say that simply because sometimes we forget that there are far more second chair leaders than there are first chair leaders. I mean, there's a lot more lay people than there are vocational ministers. There's a lot more people in the pews. I mean, you get the point, right? But sometimes we act like, well, you know, we're not that important. We're not that great. The truth of it is, you are amazingly important. The truth of it is, you are very awesome. The truth of it is, great churches cannot function without great second chair folks. So please remember that, because hell will try to convince you that you're meaningless. You know, if hell can't keep you from being a Christian, his next tactic, I'm convinced of this, is to convince you how sorry of a Christian you are. And he tries to put you down and tries to condemn you, and you should have read more. After all, you said you were going to pray 27 hours a day. Or some ridiculous statement like that. And he convinces you, and all of a sudden you start feeling condemned, and he renders you helpless, and he doesn't even have to take you out of the kingdom, he just renders you helpless. It's the same way in ministry. The church is God's idea. And if hell can convince you that from your role you are not that great, or you're not that important, or you're overlooked, or nobody cares, or you're never going to be exalted, or you're never going to be recognized, then guess what hell will do? Because he would love to sow discord and stir up tension in the body. And where does it start? At home. I mean, in the leadership. And I'm thinking at home. I'm thinking of the model at home. If hell can get mom and dad to fight and separate, an entire the ripple effect is an entire families and generations are affected by that. Same way in churches. If you can divide the leadership, and if you can divide second chair leaders from first chair leaders, and it can cause tension in this rift, man, he will do that. He will do that. Challenges for the second chair leader. Here are some. Juggling the all authority / no authority paradox. And it is a paradox. I mean, it's these two things that you have to deal with. They seem to be opposite, and yet they're a current reality of every church leader. You know, I have no authority, or I have all authority. I mean, I have no authority, and yet at times I'm put in positions where I need to act like I have all authority. And you're not even sure you can. You do something, and then you get trumped. You know what I'm saying? And all of us have suffered with that. We've all suffered through that that's been in this position. One other challenge is influence is harder to obtain from the second chair, for second chair leaders. Now you say, well, why is that important? Because I believe influence is the best basis for leadership. Let me ask you a question. Would you rather lead from a position of authority because you have the title over your door and the plaque on your desk that says top brass? Or would you rather lead from the position of influence where people want to follow you because you have so influenced their lives? I choose the second. When you're in a second chair position, oftentimes that influence is diverted to someone else. It doesn't seem fair, and yet you'll have to deal with it because God's called you there. Sometimes you're saying, how in the world am I ever going to function in this particular position? I mean, I did that and I didn't get the credit. Now, I know none of you would ever worry about that, but I have on occasion. And you just go, come on, I'm the one that rolled up my sleeves. And, you know, it must be what nurses feel about doctors. You know, the nurses do all of the work. They spend 95, 98% of the time with the patient. The doctor comes in the running gear, runs through the charts, picks it up and goes, oh, yeah, writes some notes, rebukes a nurse, and walks off, and then gets all the credit and the big bucks. And you go, what's the deal there? It's part of life. That's part of being a second chair leader. However, with God, God exalts, He raises up, and He puts down in different ways. And God never misses. Somebody else might get the credit for something you did, but God knows. Not that you need the credit, but it's just that in the end it'll all pan out. God will cover you, I promise you. He is so faithful. You have to give, here's a challenge, you have to give away credit for things you do, which is what I just said. And you have to follow without losing your identity. Maybe the most vivid example of that would be David and Saul. Good grief, man. Here's this guy that deserved to be in the chair, deserved to be the king, and yet he said, I will not touch God's anointed. What did God do? God honored him in a greater way than Saul was ever honored down the road. Not because we're keeping score, but I mean, that's just a reality of that story that we can easily see. Here's some opportunities for the second chair leader. They can lift the burden of leadership from the first chair. They can lift the leadership burden from the first chair without usurping authority. They can do that. You say, well, how can I do that? Some people have a real challenge with this. They think that somehow they have to let people know that, I'm actually the one that did that. Why do you have to let them? I don't want to answer that. I just want to throw that out. Why do we feel that way? And I think at the root of that, it would probably be a selfish motive. Someone has said that it is amazing what can be accomplished when we don't care who gets the credit. And I have learned with the kingdom of God, we can't afford to worry about where the credit goes. We just have to say, God, for the sake of souls. See, we're not even talking dollars and cents. We're not in a business where we're measured and monitored by dollars and cents. We're in a business that is measured and monitored by life and death, heaven or hell, souls. And if for no other reason, we have to discipline ourselves to say that I don't care who gets the credit. I'm not going to usurp authority. I'm going to come under the leadership that God has placed over me. By the way, the word submit, one definition of the word submit simply means to come under the protection of. So when we submit to lawyers, when we submit to, slip of the tongue, sorry. When we submit to those that are over us, what we are doing is we are coming under the covering of. Under the covering of. We don't have the same responsibility. We don't have the same requirements that they do. To him who much is given, much is required. They actually will have to give a different kind of account than we will. So that's along those lines. Now, the other thing is opportunities for the second chair is they can model servant leadership. And you say, is that important? Absolutely important. Why? Because all of us, according to Paul, are called to be ministers, which minister simply means servant. We're all called to do that. In some role or the other, God has called all of us to be in that role. And we can model to other people. And what we do in front of them, those that we influence, they will do as well. And there's actually a wonderful principle there that works both negative and positive. Okay? And here it is. What you do in moderation, those that you influence will do in excess. Now the downside of that is if I was to wear shorts that are this long, my kids and those that I influence will wear them this long, maybe. Or if I watch a certain kind of a movie condoning and saying it's okay, those that I influence, they tend to take it one step further and they'll watch one just a little worse. You know what I'm saying? As parents and leaders, you understand that. On the other side of the coin, often what happens is when you invest in a proper way to those that you model this in front of, they actually go further than you do down the road. The sins of the fathers will be visited to the third and the fourth generation. We know that. But the blessings, when the father repents and when he gets things right, but the blessings will be passed to the 1,000th generation. So we have this opportunity of modeling for those people around us and those people next to us, because the truth of it is the majority of the people in your congregation are in second chair positions. How they observe you doing things will be a huge influence on them. The other part in number 3 says, they can learn, second chair leaders can learn in an environment with greater margins for error. Now here's the cool thing about this. If Pastor Bill messes up, he's in a lot more trouble than if Pastor Lee messes up. Because of his influence over all of us. Because of where he is. Do you understand what I'm saying? If mom and dad mess up, it's a lot worse than if kids mess up. So praise God, in a second chair position, you're kind of like the kids in that respect. You have this area that has a bigger margin of error, that if you'll grow in that, it gives opportunity for you to fall forward, as John Maxwell would say. To have things that you don't do exactly right, but you actually fall forward. You have a better opportunity to do that. And let me give these last 3 practical statements, and then I just want to talk a little bit and for as long as you want, and then we'll be done. Here's some practical things. I honestly believe that great teams have great second chair leaders. I tried to think, as I was preparing this, of a great team that I knew of any kind of great team, any kind. See, this isn't just limited to a biblical perspective or inside the church, because it's a principle of God that works. And I tried to think of great teams that didn't have a great second chair leader, and I couldn't think of one. Now, I'm sure there are some. I just couldn't think of one. They've got guys and gals behind the scenes that are lifting up the first chair leader without usurping authority, who don't care who gets the credit as long as the job gets done, and wonderful, wonderful things are happening. I've had the privilege for the last 4+ months now to be working with this church. And one of the things that I've seen is they've got some great supportive staff. Guys like Lonnie, guys like Brett that spoke a while ago. These are guys that are behind the scenes. And now in a transitional time without a first chair in place, the church is going on. That tells you something about the second chair leaders. And that excites me, because I think that's the way that it ought to be. I think it's the way it ought to be. Second point is this. Second chair leaders need to make first chair leaders look good. This is the practical side of things, okay? And I know I said that a little bit up above. The third one you may not like, and so I'll tell you before I mention it, but then if you'll allow me to expand, I think I can make some sense out of it. And that is this. Second chair leaders need to take the heat. Now, I told you probably wouldn't like it, and you say, well, I'm pretty good at that, though, because I take the heat a lot. But the reality of it is second chair leaders, when they need to take the heat. Let me give you a practical example in a local church setting of this. And I want to tell you before I tell you this, where I got it from. Almost 15 years ago, maybe 15 years ago now, I went, as so many pastors did, and we went to Phoenix, to Pastor Tommy Barnett's pastor school. Now, I was a lead pastor, a very young lead pastor, but I was a lead pastor nonetheless. And I went to one of his workshops. And, those of you guys that have been to that, you know that the workshops were different than this because it was so packed and hot you couldn't get in there. But I remember standing in the back, and Dell Lane, which was the senior associate for Tommy Barnett for over 30 years. Over 30 years, senior associate led this class. And I don't remember the entire topic, but one of the things he said in that class was this. He said, it's much better, Dell Lane speaking, for the people of the congregation to get mad at Dell Lane than it is for them to get mad at Tommy Barnett. Because when they get mad at Dell Lane, they get ticked off, they send the emails, they report you to the pastor, they talk to you about the board, but they stay at the church. They get mad at the lead pastor, they leave. And you say, well, that isn't very practical. Think about that. There are times when I can diffuse some issues in the network position. There's a reason why, if any of you call our office, just call the network office in general, and say, well, we just have a problem, or I'm board member for so-and-so, or I'm youth pastor from wherever, and I need to talk about my pastor, or whatever. There's a reason it goes to my office. And it's not because I'm some sort of a sicko that likes to deal with that kind of stuff. That's not the reason, okay? In fact, I absolutely hate it. However, it's much better for it to come to me than it is to go to Pastor Bill. Now, let me also explain something else to you. When you work on a great team like I have the privilege of doing, Pastor Bill knows about, not all of it, but most of it. Now, let me just stop and put a parenthesis in here as well. The other day I had a phone call, or actually it was an email or a text from one of you. And in that email and text said that I received an email from a person in the church, and they described the scenario. And here's the email. And what do I do with this? Do I give it to my lead pastor? Or not? Now, I gave some advice, and I said, what I think I would do in your position is I would respond to the person this way. And at this point, I wouldn't tell the lead pastor. And to my knowledge, that's worked. And to my knowledge, there hasn't been any repercussion, at least that I know at this point. Now, should there be repercussion and should it go further, there comes a point where you may have to bring in your lead pastor. But what do you do with one of those kinds of this? It was this kind of an email. You know what I'm saying? The pointing fingers, and you shouldn't have this, and blah, 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 blah. Well, what does a lead pastor do with that information? If he's a shepherd, which he needs to be, it's going to rip his heart out. Even if it's false, even if it's wrong, it's going to rip his heart out. I would rather my heart be ripped out than Bill's heart be ripped out. Because I'm here to serve him and to lift him up. And sometimes you can diffuse that junk by taking the heat. And they never ever have to know it. And then there are other times you have to divulge some of that information. And you have to talk through it. Or if it's a scenario that so-and-so's mad at whatever. Because see, I need to remember in my position, I'm not the pastor. Bill Wilson will have to give a different account than I have to give when he stands before God. And I better remember that, and so should you in your local churches, okay? So there are times where I can't completely hold it from him. He has to be part of it. But I can sure help him lift that burden. And I can come alongside and I can be the one that's there to help him, okay? So that's what I mean about the heat. Number 4, public support. Now, I know this isn't always true. I want to say this before I make this statement. And by the way, I stole this saying from Andy Stanley. For years, I was part of the Enjoy Life Club. Those of you old enough to remember how John Maxwell did his monthly tape club, I was one of those, and my board allowed me to do that, and it was a help for me back all those years ago. And the first monthly leadership tape, or probably a tape back then, that John Maxwell ever didn't do, was when he allowed Andy Stanley to do one. And the name of the teaching was Challenging the Process. And so here's Andy Stanley, founding pastor of Northport. All of you know who he is. And he's on there and he's talking about leaders. And he's talking about how we shoot ourselves in the foot sometimes as leaders, as upcoming second chair leaders. And what he said was, we've adopted a policy, and I've always felt this was my policy, and I have a couple of staff guys here that could either vouch for this or not. But I've always tried to adopt a policy, and here's what it is. Public support of your first chair leader will get you a private audience with them. And Andy Stanley made the point that so many second chair leaders, although he didn't use that terminology, but he said guys and gals that are coming up, because they're natural leaders already and they have a pretty good perspective and viewpoint of what's going on, they will blast lead pastors out of the water publicly and then wonder why they don't get a private audience. And I've learned over the years, now there's times when you cannot stand for what is going on in a public setting, but those are very, 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 and I could add many more verys, very rare. Okay? Just because you have a difference of opinion or you relate with the first paragraph I read from the book that says, if I was in that position, I would do it different, or something like that, doesn't necessarily give us the right to stand up and challenge him. If you will give public support, he will give you or she will give you a private audience. I believe that in most cases. Because I know with me, I'm listening to the guys that I know's got my back. To the gals that I know's got me covered. I want to hear their hearts. And if they come to me and say, Pastor, I love you and I died for you and this and that and the other, but we've got this against you. Not really that way, but we hear this or we think this is wrong or maybe you should consider. It gives you a different audience. You won't get that audience if you don't give public support. You just won't get that audience. I'm not even saying they're right. I'm just saying you need to give them public support. What did David do with Saul? My goodness. Can you imagine trying to support that guy? I mean, the Bible says that the Spirit of God withdrew from him. That God had removed his anointing. And yet there was many, 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 many years beyond that David still submitted to him as God's anointed one. But I'm not that good. I'm not sure I am. And I'm not sure David was. I mean, I look at portions of David's life. The guy was a tough guy. I mean, the guy was a warrior. The guy was all of these things. And yet something he learned about in his heart. About submitting to his God and submitting to the first chair position. And lastly, are you the kind of second chair leader you would want if you were in the first chair position? That's a question that I think we could continually ask ourselves. What kind of a leader am I becoming? What kind of a second chair leader am I? What kind of a leader am I? So, thoughts or questions or comments or disputes or disagreements? I'll go with anything. So, anything at all? Yeah.
I wonder how you can best add value to the lead pastor when someone in the congregation comes to you with a complaint about the lead pastor that maybe you agree with? I mean, what's the best way to handle that?
It depends on a lot of things. One thing that I would say is this. Regardless of the way people usually gather information or data are through what I often call sound bites. It may be a word, it may be one gesture, it may be that I walk in today and I say hi to Ryan, but I don't say hi to you, and you go, well, he ignored me. It's something that I draw my conclusions with, all right? Sometimes they're accurate, most of the time they're not. Most of the time they're not. What I try to say is this. I always 100% support my pastor in areas of character, because I've got to know them. And I don't know if I put this in. Did I skip any blanks? Okay. Because one of the things that I was reading or thinking about as I was preparing this is that as you observe the pastor and see what he does, observe the leader and see what they do, you learn their character. So if somebody comes to me and said, Randy Zissel's a big liar. Now, you guys don't know Randy in here, but he and I have walked together for 16 years, 17 years. And I've known him a long time. And there's one thing I can guarantee. I don't know what he did. I don't know if it was boneheaded or if it was bad or if it was good. But what I know is he will not lie. And so if anybody insinuates something to me that is out of character, I can speak to his character and say something like this. I don't know about that. I don't know if I agree or I disagree with that. But what I think is this. Randy is a man of character in the areas of integrity, in the areas of honesty, and he would not lie. And I can speak to that. Now, if you have another issue with that, I'd encourage you need to probably go talk to them. Because Matthew 18 still is kind of the trump card for all of us, and it's the biblical principle of what we do if we have odd against someone. If you're offended with them or you're angry with them, you send them there. And I think sometimes, Sherry, we have to do that. Now, that public support may not only give you, Sherry, but also may require you to now go to a private audience and say, they said this, I supported you public, but I think you're doing this.
I think that I have a unique situation that I'm in. My senior pastor is very, very open with me, and I can talk to him about a lot of things. And so I don't, that's not hard for me to do. But I do find myself frequently in an awkward position with the people in the congregation where they'll come to me about something and like, oh, Fred, I don't have to deal with this.
Yeah.
But sometimes you just have to.
Yeah, sometimes you have to. Let me make a couple comments about it. Not insinuate. I know you and Ron's relationship, and it's a good relationship, and I've heard about the openness and candidness not only from you but from Ron. So I know that you guys have that. But let me just make a couple of general statements in that area. One thing is this. If you allow yourself as second chair leaders to be a filter for every complaint and garbage, you will get plenty of it. And there are times that you just have to say, I don't go there. There are times with certain people, there were some people that, I think of one couple that no longer attends the church in Madras, but for years did, and I wouldn't walk up to her, and I'll bet as soon as I say this, these guys will know who. And I got to the place, I wouldn't say, how are you doing? Because it was like a taxi truck waiting to dump, and I was going to get the whole load, you know what I'm saying? And there's some people, you just can't get around them and open up, engage in any kind of a conversation that might lead there because they're going to go there. The second thing is a general statement. So don't be a garbage collector, and you won't get as much garbage, okay? Let them know that I publicly support my pastor. I'm on his team or her team. I'm in a subordinate role to them, and I am offering value, and that does not come by me bad-mouthing them in any way, shape, or form. In fact, my opinion is not the most important thing. It's that God has placed them here, and for now God has placed me here. And by the way, let me just stop and put a parenthesis in. You may want to check your heart. Make sure God has you where you are. And if you're not where you're supposed to be, then get off the team. And I don't mean that bad. And exit in a very good way. All right? But what I'm saying is, if you can't support that leader that's in the first row, you have no business being there. And that doesn't even mean they're bad and you're good or anything else. It just means that, not everybody fits on everybody's team. And we saw even biblical examples where they had split ways and go a different direction. Let them go gracefully. Let them find out. You go gracefully. Don't divide the church. Don't say, get your last dig in on the way out. Just go. And let God do that. So that's one side, okay? The other thing I would say, Sherry, is this, that I think it's very important that we create this environment when people come to us, before we will even engage in conversation, if it's a significant complaint. Now, if it's a misunderstanding, Pastor Bill didn't kiss my baby the other day, when they came in. And I go, well, he had strep throat. Would you like him to? I mean, there might be just a real practical solution. You see what I'm saying? And sometimes we in second chair positions, we are privy to some information that we can just instantly diffuse it. Okay? But make sure that people know that I am about creating an environment everywhere I go where I am in complete support of this local leadership. Okay? Now, as you do that, you create an environment on the team that opens ongoing, you and Ron, that you mentioned, and others that are on your team, because I've been there and spoke to your leadership team. And I know that there's this open, candid stuff that goes on. And there needs to be that. Well, I was with Ron's team, which, Ron, you're a great example this year. You've been an associate, then you've been a lead pastor, and you've done all this stuff for years, and now you're back to an associate, and you've juggled this with great class. And honestly, I mean, here's a guy that could stand up here and teach this, because he's done a great job at that. And I've been with their team, and they discuss candidly about trust and about what Lencioni talks about with the 5 dysfunctions of a team, and how we got lack of trust and lack of commitment and lack of these different things, accountability and stuff. And when you create this team where everybody's got each other's back, you create an environment that you can talk very candidly, privately, and a lot of things are solved. There's been times when I've had my leadership when I was a senior pastor, and now on our leadership team, where we've been together in our meetings with each other, and we've discussed things, and somebody has said, Pastor Lee, this is how you came across to so-and-so. And I had to say, I'm sorry, you're right. And I had to go back. It warranted an apology. And there's been times when I said, Pastor Bill or Pastor Boyd or Pastor Lee or Pastor Brian, one of us have to remind each other, and Pam, one of us has to remind each other that we have done something. We didn't mean to. We just did it, and it came across this way. Well, the more solidity and team environment you get on, which, by the way, second chairs help build this and foster this, the more of that you get, the funner it is to be on the team. Now, not fun when you get rebuked, but knowing that you can be rebuked and you're still loved and you're not off the team, and together we'll make the right choices, and as a team we'll move forward and look good as a team. So there's times when you just got to say, you need to talk with Pastor. Yeah. Josh.
Hey, can you give us, I'm going to put you on the spot, but can you give us a few pointers to remember when we have a good relationship with our senior pastor, we're good friends, yet he's still your boss? What are some good lines to draw there as far as keeping that proper perspective?
And it's a great question. You're a great friend with your senior pastor, or you're the first chairperson, and yet he's still your boss. In a church, the greatest treasure that any lead pastor can ever find is somebody that will allow you to be friend, boss, mentor, pastor, and they know how to distinguish the different roles at different times, and they let you just be you. When you find them, hold on to them for a lifetime, because they're phenomenal. I just want to add that. The other thing I would say is this, and I don't want to oversimplify this, and I will give a couple of practical things, but I don't want to oversimplify this. The golden rule absolutely applies here. How, if you were in that position, because see, all of you are in second chair positions, but I always hate to use this terminology, but you have somebody under you. You have people on your team. How do you want them to treat you? I mean, sometimes it's amazing how we expect something from those that we influence differently than the way we treat those above us. I have a hard time calling Pastor Bill, Bill. I have a hard time when we're at a Blazer game together. And yet it's just Bill, and he doesn't want to be called Pastor Bill, but there's an awesome respect. Now, it's not a weird thing. It's not a hierarchy. It's not a bow down and worship, because if it was that kind of thing, I'm not in for that. I'm just honoring enough to say I'm not going there. Okay? But it's more than that. It's something that I understand that's a place that God has put me. Now, some practical things, Josh, and I think it's a great question. I think that when you're in front of the church, you need to say appropriate things in front of the church. So, for instance, if your church calls him Pastor whoever, now the church I attend, Joe hates the name Pastor Joe. He wants to be called Joe. In fact, he rebuked me not publicly, but he said, don't call me Pastor Joe. And I go, but you are Pastor. And he goes, yeah, but the other guy, they just know me as Joe. I think Paul prefers Paul in front of the church there at Church on the Hill. So whatever's appropriate there, speak to them about them, address them in an appropriate way. I think that's a good thing. I think when you're out doing things other than church things, okay, and you know what I mean? It's not a board meeting, it's not a staff meeting, it's not a church event. It's a Dunes Day, or you guys go to the Dunes, I know a lot as men's group there from Jacksonville. So when you're down there, just be a guy. Allow the guy to be a guy to where he can let his hair down, or a gal, where they can let their hair down and be who they are. It's the way you'd want to be treated. And don't hold them to some kind of weird high standard at that point. And you say, well, how do I do that? Just treat them the way you'd like to be treated. I don't know if that's enough practical things, Josh, but honestly, it can be that way. Now, I have people that I highly respect that everywhere I see them, I still call them pastor. I saw Bill Gallagher last night. I said, hey, pastor. He's rebuked me a couple of times since he's left the superintendent. Say, I'm just Bill. And I go, I know, hi, pastor. I can't help it. I mean, that's just kind of how I'm wired. But it's a respectful thing because he influenced me in that way. Now, I don't mean this bad or derogatory, but he really didn't influence me in other ways. That's where he really influenced me. So I wasn't exactly the bosom buddy type friend as well as, the pastor. That was a little different role. But I had, honestly, I believe some of my best friends in the world were my leadership team and my staff. And I think and I feel that with Bill. I feel that with Boyd. I feel that with Pam. I feel that with Brian. I just feel like that we are all friends, and it's really cool. But when I'm in a public setting, I address them in a way that I think is appropriate. And I think I do that. I don't use my friendship. I try not to ever use my friendship as an excuse to make a derogatory statement about them, or to cut on them in a way that might in some way embarrass them. I don't have to do that. I don't have to. And I do that in private, and we'll cut on each other and have fun. But not in public. Not in public. Because, see, it can be misinterpreted. Going back to what was said earlier, that becomes a soundbite that is misinterpreted in a wrong way. Now, if you have a team, if you're on a team where hierarchy is demanded, and I'm at the top and I'm the top brass, there again, you may need to question your heart. I won't be on one of those teams. Period. That isn't the team that Jesus serves, and it's not the one I serve. And I don't mean that bad. I can't do that because I'm a person that absolutely honors people of influence and position that understand who they are, but I cannot go the dictator route. And I don't think God wants us to. I just don't think He does. Comment, Greg.
Just another question. Partly taking one out of what you're working with. What are the most common things over the years? I'm not identifying a specific church, but when people have a hard time communicating with the pastor, not necessarily, not a hard time, not with the issue, but just with basic communication, then the first thing they do is come back to me. It says, he's not on the same page, doesn't understand what I'm saying, like this. And I try to envision, what do I do? If I get all three of them together in the foyer someplace there, I've suddenly revealed the contents of two confidential conversations.
Right. Right.
Okay, you take it from there. I think you got the basic concept. What do you do?
I think there again, the public support and the private audience thing would play in a lot here. If I could go to my pastor at a point and say, I know that you think you're communicating really straight with this, but they're not getting it. Now, I'm saying that behind the office door. I'm saying that over coffee at wherever. We're sitting down and we're talking, and you're not doing it in a bad way. I mean, there's times that I go up to Pastor Bill, and he just forgot a little something that he really needs it at this point, and it's like I don't want to correct him, but at the same time I'll say, Pastor Bill. Well, later he comes back and he says, that's exactly why I got you there. Thank you. Thank you. And I think if we can go to that pastor, hopefully we all serve lead pastors that are such that if you went to him and said, Joan over here, really, she's trying, and I honestly think she's sincere, but you guys aren't connecting. I think if we say that in private, hopefully, Greg, and I can't always guarantee this.
I did that.
Okay.
A specific time comes into my mind, and the pastor's eyes got wide. I didn't know what he was going to do, but it helped.
Yeah. Well, and let me make a statement, because you just opened up a can of worms I won't go too far with, but I want to make this statement. There are times when our responsibility is to call it to the attention of the pastor, and then you leave it alone. It is not your job to go to the next step. It's like a prophetic word in the church. See, oftentimes prophetic people think that not only should I deliver the prophetic word, but I need to see to it that it's carried out. That's not your job. It wasn't in the Old Testament, and it's not in the New Testament, and it's not today. You are to say what is there. It's to be judged by the leaders, and then they all do something with it. And a lot of times you have to leave that. There are times, quite honestly, when I have delivered the mail, so to speak, to the first chair leader and felt they didn't do anything with it, and I'm kind of ticked off. Because I feel like somehow it reflects me, and then I'm reminded that it is not a reflection on me because I did what I was supposed to do.
Right.
Now I know that's not always easy, because why? We're all potential leaders. Because we all say, well, we would do it different. You know, one of the things that I have observed, I was a presbyter for about 10 years before coming in here, and I used to say things like, and I know I never said it out loud, or not very often, sometimes. But if I was in there, we'd do this and that. And then I get in here and I realize why we didn't do this and that. And I realize how hard it is. It's the armchair quarterback that watches games on TV and says, well, I could do it. And then they get out here and here comes 1,000 pounds of flesh ready to dive on top of you. And you go, well, no wonder they didn't do it that well. It's just, you know, until you're in that other position, it's easy to say I would and this and that, but you don't know. And here's what I'm saying. One of the reasons first chair leaders are where they are is because they are down the road just a little, and God has given them. And at times, God has given them more experience. And at times, they have a little more insight, a little more discernment, and a little more practical wisdom about things. And even when you think that you have a full handle on this, you may still miss it. And here's the cool thing. When you've delivered the mail to them, that releases you in many ways of the responsibility, unless they give you further instructions. It releases you, okay? And their actions, they will have to give an account for. Okay? Any other comments or questions or thoughts? I think we're about 4 minutes.
I would just say on your analogy of football is that, you know, we're like playing the line. We're there to protect and defend as well as take some blows.
Absolutely.
And, you know, if we step aside too many times and the quarterback gets nailed, we're not going to be on the line anymore. We're not going to be on the team. We're not going to call it. So, you know, in retrospect of several years doing both, you know, the thing that I would say to us that are in a less than lead pastor position is to remember that we're there to protect the person that we're serving. And all of these things, what we're talking about today, is whether that's verbal or actual or, you know, like the deal last night. You know, maybe you have to protect a jacktaper by locking a doorway or whatever. I mean, that's what you're there for. Yeah. And so you know, it could be dangerous to your spiritual life or not, and you have to make that call. Yeah. And but then God gives you, there's the supernatural that comes in there. Yeah. God gives you grace for that moment. Absolutely. Because I was a lead pastor in a first chair position, and then I came back to this position. I have to tell you, the leaders that I had in my church, there was a reverse mentoring that took place. And when I came to this chair, I used to think, I want to be like them. I want to do for them, for Bill and for the team, what they did for me. We're in this road, you know, in life, and you're in a constant growth mode. From glory to glory, He's changing us, not only spiritually, but we should be evolving and changing all the time as we add more information, and as we add more wisdom and more experience and more failures and more successes. And I would just say, just grow. Just treat people the way you want to be treated. Lift up the pastor the way you want to lift him up. Don't brown nose. Man, please don't ever. I hated brown nosers. You know, I worked on, some of you don't even know that term, and I won't describe it because it's kind of gross, but the reality of it is, I just didn't like people that was always sucking up to the bosses. I didn't like it when I was a boss in the construction trades. I didn't like it as a pastor, so that's not what I'm talking about. But when you got people that'll take the bullet for you, and you got people that'll stand up regardless of what the size of the lineman coming across the line is and take the shot for you, it'll make you want to perform at a whole new level as the lead chair. It'll make you want to do that. And one of these days, some of you will be in that role. And by the way, if you're not, that's okay. Dale Lane chose to never be in it. Dale Lane could have went to any Assembly of God church in the United States. I mean, think about the influence that guy had. He could have went anywhere and senior pastor, but he said, no, God called me to this role. I don't look for the next position. I'm not trying to climb a ladder. I'm not trying to do that because I'm secure with my current role. And whatever that means in the future, God gets to call the shots.
And I think that's a posture that will help all of us. Second chair isn't easy. It's difficult. If you haven't been challenged this week, it's not over yet. There are some things that are challenging, and I understand that. But God can honor you. This is a great book. I'm telling you, there's some wonderful biblical principles written to Christian leaders. And it's an amazing book that I would challenge all of you to put into your library and read. So we're out of time now. I'm here, and if you want to visit a little more, I can. But I also want to honor our time at 3:45. And God bless you guys, and thanks for coming.
Thank you for listening to the 2010 Summit Podcast. For more information on the Oregon Ministry Network and our events, please visit our website at oregonag.org.